A controversial fight Saturday night at the Barclays Center as Gervonta Tank Davis retained his WBA lightweight title with a majority decision draw over Lamont Roach. And joining me to recap this fight and talk about what is next for both fighters is the great boxing play-by-play voice Curran Bhatia, who joins me now. Curran, what's going on, my friend?
What's going on, Dexter? The one thing they say about boxing, it is the theater of the unexpected. And certainly we got that last night at Barclays Center. I was in attendance, so I'm excited to chat with you about
And
this.
I'm really glad, Curran, that you were there because I wanted to talk to somebody who was there. It was very interesting to watch. There was a lot of controversy surrounding this fight. So let's start with the controversy. Gervonta Tank
Yes.
Davis, he appeared to take a knee in the fight, but it was not ruled a knockdown. This happened in the ninth round. What's your take on that moment? And should the referee have called it differently here?
It was certainly a bizarre situation in the ninth round of last night's title fight. This was, of course, Gervonta Tank Davis defending his belt against Lamont Roach, who's also a champion in the lower weight class at 130 pounds. He was moving up to 135 to challenge Tank. And this was actually supposed to be a fairly easy night at the office for Tank Davis. He was an 18 to 1 favorite. So if you look at that, he was obviously expected to win. And we're used to seeing Tank get knockouts, right? He has over a 93% knockout percentage. So that was the conventional wisdom. But people who had looked into it a little further knew that Lamont Roach is absolutely no slouch. Like we said, he's a champion in his own right, only had one loss to tough Jamel Herring. And the best part of it, the most interesting dynamic part of it all, was that Tank and Lamont Roach actually had history together. They grew up together in the same area, in the DMV area, and they also sparred together, trained together. So there was a lot of history there. And so we were all expecting to see probably Tank get a win, but definitely an interesting close fight. And I think what we talked about there in your question was the most intriguing part of it. It was a much closer fight than a lot of people expected. And then in the ninth round, as they're starting to engage, Lamont Roach lands a couple punches, and we see Tank Davis do something that we very rarely see. He took a knee. Now, it wasn't a knee due to punishment. He took a knee in a way to almost call a timeout, and he went to the corner. The corner took out a towel, and they rubbed the face of Tank Davis, and he just wanted to get. He said he had some grease that came into his eye, and that was the reason. And then they started fighting again. Now, when you take a knee in boxing, unless it's ruled a slip by a referee, that's supposed to be a knockdown. If any part of your body touches the canvas besides the bottom of the soles of your feet, of your shoes, that is supposed to be a knockdown. In this case, Steve Willis, the referee, he started to count, but then he stopped when he heard the explanation from Tank Davis. And so this was a bizarre scene. And in one way, it could have certainly been called a knockdown against
Mm-hmm.
Tank Davis because he took a knee. And the other part of it is there's a point could have been taken off or even a disqualification from getting help from your corner, including that towel to the face. You're not allowed to do that during the round. So there are no timeouts in boxing for boxers themselves. The athletes can't call a timeout, right? A referee can in certain situations. The boxers can't. In a way, Tank Davis called a timeout for himself there in the middle of round nine.
Yeah, in a way he did that, and that's what makes this so, I would say, weird, right? Currently, this makes this weird in this situation in terms of what was the referee supposed to do, and we're going to get into that a little bit more. But I've seen this. I've seen some fans, I've seen some analysts feel that Lamont Roach was robbed of a victory here. Do you think Roach did enough to win outright, or do you agree with the judge's decision that we saw here of a majority draw?
Bottom line, last night, Lamont Roach's stock goes way up in this fight, in this performance, even though he got a draw because of how competitive this fight was. And like we said, this was shocking because Tank was an 18 to 1 favorite. Tank was the bigger man. Remember, Roach was coming up in weight to challenge Tank for his belt. So this was shocking that it was as close as it was. I think the word robbery gets thrown around way too much in boxing. A close fight isn't a robbery, right? A close fight can go either way depending on the judges' scorecards. And we know there's different criteria that judges look at to score a fight. And there is a subjective nature to that, a human element to that. Now, I think the key here wasn't really the judging, but more the refereeing. And because of that bizarre moment and Steve Willis, the referee, choosing to not take a point off when Tank took a knee, that really sends a ripple effect through the rest of the fight because now that isn't scored a 10-8 round, let's let's say, in advantage of Roach. Now that round is up for grabs, and whoever wins that round wins that round. And that also changes the strategy as you go on later on, because let's say Tank was deducted a point there for the knockdown, right? That might change his aggressive nature as he goes out into round 10, into round 11, and around 12. And he might try to go for a knockout. That could work, or that could play into Roach's hand. So the entire situation would have been different without that bizarre situation. So it's really hard to know. The one thing I'll say, it's not a robbery when it's a close fight, but it is a bizarre situation with an interesting twist with this referee situation in round 9. So we'll really never know what would have happened had it been scored differently by the referee there in round 9.
No, we won't, and you're right about that. The word around this absolutely has to be bizarre. It's very unique,
Yes.
whatever adjective you want to put on it there. But here's the thing, Curran, in controversial fights like this, the role of the judges and the referees, as you just mentioned, it comes under heavy scrutiny. Do you think this fight exposes a larger issue with boxing officiating, and what do you think can be done to improve it? Because anytime we have situations like this, especially in a fight that was close, there's always people that are going to say, hey, how do we fix this?
Certainly. In any fight that one result goes one way or another, especially in close fights, you're going to hear people saying robbery. You're going to say, oh, the judges, things like that. Well, remember, the case in this fight really wasn't the judges necessarily. It was more so the referee, right? And his decision-making process in that controversial 9th round. So that's something that has to be looked at. The fight overall, like I said, it's not a robbery because it was a close fight. Even if you look at total punches, Tank landed 103, Roach landed 112. Now, Tank was more efficient. Now, total punches definitely do not tell the story of the fight because boxing is scored round by round, and the judges look at different criteria. They look at clean punching, ring generalship, defense, effective aggression. These are the things that the 3 judges at ringside look at. So the question is, what can we do better, right? And the answer is, one is training for both judges and referees. And I think you have to train judges and referees for these split-second decisions that have to be made that maybe aren't even as common, especially something like this, right? In this case, Tank Davis said, hey, before this fight, I got my hair done. It was a little greasy, and that grease was going into my eye, and I wouldn't be able to see, so I needed to get that towel off. So I don't think anyone in the arena or watching at home thinks Tank Davis took a knee because he was hurt in that moment. I think he was trying to take that time out. But again, that's against the rules. So the question now becomes, like, where do you draw that line? Because now, what if you other fighters say, well, I'm going to take a timeout, and they say it's not because I was hurt, but they might be hurt. So that rule could be abused in the future, and that's the reason the rule is there. So you have to follow the set of rules. So I think a lot of different things have been thrown out. An AI judge has been starting to be used in different cases, not for actual scoring events, but just for testing purposes. People have said, hey, they should have 3 other judges, maybe 6 total. Maybe those other three can watch at home because you can't always see every angle when you're watching ringside. There's different elements to it. And I think a lot of sports, Dexter, you know this, are working with technology to see how they can enhance the sport. At the end of the day, you just want to get all the calls right, but you don't want to lose the human element as well. And I think that's what a lot of sports are wrestling with. And we're seeing more and more technology used in other sports. So the question is going to be, how does boxing leverage that technology and how does it make changes? But the biggest thing I think it always goes back to is training for these judges and these referees. And that's something we want to see more of going forward.
Training is absolutely important, and we'll see if we see more of that going forward in the sport. I want to get back to Lamont Roach because for him, this was the biggest fight of his career. And there is a school of thought that he proved himself as an elite fighter here. Did this fight, in your eyes, elevate his stock in the world of boxing? And does he deserve a rematch here against Tank Davis?
Yes, and yes. Yes, this elevated the stock of Lamont Roach in a huge way. This put Roach on the radar of many sports fans. Now, remember, Roach was a champion in his own right at his weight class of 130 pounds. He had only once lost to a tough opponent. And so this was someone that boxing fans knew, but maybe the mainstream audience didn't know him. Lamont Roach announced his presence last night with hanging with Tank Davis and making it such a close and competitive fight. And remember, 2 of those scorecards ended up being a draw. So that's how close this fight was. And I think a lot of people were shocked at how close it was, and Roach earned that by his boxing technique, by boxing and moving. And he, found some openings on Tank Davis. And this isn't what we normally see with a Tank Davis opponent. Normally, Tank Davis is knocking these guys out. And that's a testament to how great Tank Davis is. So Roach certainly catapulted himself into the conversation for big and meaningful fights at 130 pounds, 135 pounds, or wherever he wants to go with his career. In terms of a contractual rematch, there actually is, it was reported that there is a contractual rematch for Lamont Roach. The question is, will that be next? Because after the fight, Tank Davis was asked, hey, do you want to have a rematch? And Tank said, yes, I do. I want to run it back, but I don't think that's what's going to be next. And when he was asked, Tank Davis was asked, what is going to be next? He said, hey, well, I think my opponent came into my locker room and everyone wants to see Tank Davis versus Shakur Stevenson, for example. Shakur Stevenson wasn't there. Jake Paul was there, and Jake Paul was ringside. So there's rumors that maybe that fight is brewing next. I actually asked Tank Davis about that at the press conference. Said, hey, do you want to crack at Jake Paul? And he said, yes, this is my official call out. I would like to have that. Jake Paul was there. He tweeted about the fight. He was watching ringside as an interested observer. So maybe that's in the plans. We're not sure exactly what Tank Davis wants to do next. He does want to rematch Roach at some point, and Roach has opened himself up to now having the rematch and also many other interesting possibilities in the division.
Yeah, a lot of possibilities there for Roach. And you're right, we all want to see the Tank Davis versus Shakur Stevenson fight. I'm not sure we want to see him fight Jake Paul, but I'm sure there's some people out there that would like to see this. Now, talking about Tank, you just mentioned it. He's been dominant throughout his career. He's one of the biggest draws in the sport. However, this performance, I think you can argue, could have exposed some vulnerabilities with him. Do you think this fight revealed weaknesses in his game? And if so, what adjustments does he need to make moving forward?
I don't think Tank Davis was exposed in any way in this fight. What I think happened was, and we're speculating here based on comments that Tank Davis made leading up to this fight. I spoke to Tank Davis about this at the press conference as well. Tank said, hey, I want to retire from the sport of boxing, right? He's only 30 years old, but he said he wants to hang it up after 2025. That was before this fight. And in a way, I actually think this fight might be a blessing in disguise for Tank Davis because it had awoken that giant within, that fire inside. And now after this, Tank said, hey, I want to have at least 4 more fights. So I think maybe the hunger is now back, right? Any competitor who's in any sport needs a challenge, right? You need something to a reason to wake up in the morning and do your road work and go to the gym and spar with tough sparring partners and put in that training every single day. You need a reason to do that. Obviously, you're going to be financially compensated for doing so, but you also need a reason within to train as hard as you need to. So in a way, having this draw, the first blemish now in Tank Davis's career, he's 30-0 and now one in that draw column, still got 28 knockouts to his name, huge knockout percentage, huge star still in his own right. Tank Davis is still a champion, still a top 5 pound for pound fighter, but maybe the hunger is there now. Maybe something is more awoken inside of Tank Davis. And he said that. He said, hey, I lost this fight because of what I did, or excuse me, I got a draw in this fight because of what I did. So I think maybe something is there for Tank going forward, and I think this will motivate him going forward.
I am intrigued to see how this motivates him going forward, Curran, and that leads me to my final question for you, because where do both fighters go from here? If the rematch doesn't happen right away, who are the most logical next opponents for both Tank and Roach going forward? Where do you think both of these fighters go?
There are so many very interesting matchups for Tank Davis going forward. Now, obviously, the rematch with Roach makes a lot of sense, especially the fact that they had history. This was a competitive fight. It ended up being a draw. The bizarre moment in round 9, that is certainly controversial. So many different reasons for them to have a rematch. But let's just say the rematch isn't next, and that seems to be the case based on post-fight comments from Tank Davis. There are many other opponents that we all want to see. Probably the number one opponent that everyone wants to see, Tank Davis versus Shakur Stevenson. That's a fight with two young stars, undefeated in their prime. They're both charismatic. They both have done amazing things in the ring, and they've been circling for a long time. They've said each other's names at different points, and we'd love to see that fight happen. Otherwise, there's also Vasily Lomachenko, who was contemplating retirement, and there were talks that he was actually going to fight Tank Davis, and we're not sure exactly what's happening next. Devin Haney has a fight scheduled, but that's another intriguing opponent, as well as Ryan Garcia. Now, Tank Davis actually beat Ryan Garcia, but now Ryan Garcia moving up in weight and things like that, that could change the dynamics and make for a very intriguing rematch as well. So the question is, who does Tank want next? He said, again, his next opponent walked into his locker room. Well, someone was in the building. That was Jake Paul. So there's been a lot of rumors that maybe that's the fight next, but at some point we hope we get the Roach fight. Now for Roach, like we said, he's inserted himself into the conversation and a lot of different options for him. We mentioned there's also Pitbull Cruz, who is ringside, and so many other great fighters in attendance. Now, the last thing I'll say, though, is Dexter, you said, who's the next logical step? Now, we're dealing in boxing, and logical is not always what happens in boxing, right? So
Yeah.
in terms of, yes, of course, the logical step would be to see this fight again next. That probably isn't what's going to happen. And that is because we know boxing is the theater of the unexpected. That's just what the sweet science is. And we get different scenarios, different things thrown into us. This morning we're talking about taking a knee and what that means and all of that. So there's always different things in boxing. That's what makes it so intriguing. The last thing I'll say too is I think this fight actually helped the stock of Roach, and I think also it made it more intriguing for future Tank fights. Right? We know he's human, right? He is such a great fighter. 30-0, 28 knockouts. We know he's human, and so I think that adds more intrigue to these future matchups that we're talking
No,
about.
I think that's a fair point because you've seen how dominant that he has been, and it's going to be really interesting where things go. You're right. Another good point you make, Curran, is logic does not always work when it comes to the sport of boxing. That is
No.
absolutely true for sure. But this was a good breakdown of a fight that was a lot closer than many people thought it would be between Gervonta Tank Davis and Lamont Roach. Controversial. We'll see how things go from here in the lightweight division. But that is Curran Bhatia. Check out his fantastic work. Does a great job covering the sport of boxing as a play-by-play announcer. Curran, always a pleasure to talk about the sweet science with you, and we'll do it again soon.
Dexter, thank you so much for the time. Always a pleasure to chat with you. Let's hope some future logical matchups come together. We love this sport and we just want to see the best fight the best. Very interesting night at Barclays Center. I was there live. It was a great event. And thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me about it.
Anytime, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you.